Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction.
See what the Empire has done to your lives? Your families and your freedom?
Good people will fight if we lead them.
The rebellion is spreading.
Now we take the war to them.
The Republic will be reorganized.
Systems either change or die.
Into the first.
You give way to an enemy this evil with this much power, and you condemn the galaxy to an eternity of submission.
And wake up. There is one way. Be fighting from the start.
Long live the Empire!
Fight the Empire!
Let's call it war.
Remember this. Try.
Hey, Sophie.
Hey, Ellie.
3 businesswomen are staying at a hotel on Imperial Coruscant. They're drinking, telling stories into the night, but eventually, one of the women gets tired and goes to bed. But she can't sleep. Her buddies are still drinking, and they're getting kind of rowdy. The woman asks them to quiet down. They've got an early morning tomorrow, but they tell her to shove it and keep drinking. What's worse, the other 2 have begun to tell political jokes, including jokes about the Emperor, a big no-no, as you can imagine. So the woman gets an idea. She heads downstairs and asks the man at the front desk to send up room service with some tea. She goes back up to the room and says, you 2 need to be more careful not to make those Emperor jokes. Everyone knows the ISB has eyes and ears everywhere, even this shitty hotel, I expect. Here, I'll prove it. She kneels down to a power outlet and speaks into it. Supervisor Blevin, we'd like to have some tea sent up to room 10. Her friends, of course, think she's an idiot. They're laughing at her, saying she's even stupider than the Emperor himself. But not 5 minutes later, there's a knock at the door. It's room service with tea. The 2 drunk women go pale and hush up. They drink their tea in morbid silence and head right to bed. The first woman finally gets a good night's rest, but when she wakes up in the morning, her 2 friends are nowhere to be seen. She goes down to the man at the front desk and asks if he's seen them. "Oh, it was horrible," he says. "ISB agents came and arrested them before dawn." The woman is alarmed. "Will I be arrested too?" The man laughs. No, you'll be fine. Supervisor Blevin really liked the tea joke.
Oh, that's quality. I like that.
Adding to the list of jokes about the KGB that I have stolen and made Star Wars. Hello and welcome to Daughters of Ferrix, your favorite podcaster's favorite podcast. I'm your host, Eleanor Mueller, and with me is my co-host, Sophia Dunstan. Sophie, how's your August been?
Scorching. It has been like 100 degrees for like 3 weeks straight.
Hey gang, this is Ellie from editing. As you can tell, Sophie's audio is kind of fucked up this episode. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can really do about it. It's not horrendous, but it's like Zoom call quality. I've done what I can, but bear with us. We'll be back to normal quality next week. Love you, bye. Is it that bad over there?
It is pretty bad. The whole, not putting sulfur in ship fuel anymore thing supposedly has, instantaneously made climate change, 10 times worse. Personally, I'm willing to believe it, honestly, with how hot it's been.
It's almost like things are sometimes getting a lot worse.
Nothing ever happens unless it's going to make everything worse.
That's true. I remember when summers in Salt Lake City, where Sophia lives, I remember when summers there used to be, is normal a fair word?
85 was a nice warm day.
Yeah, they used to be, a little toasty, but pretty fine. It's a desert, it's got some heat, but things sure do be, of course, here in Portland, we get domed off by the heat every now and again, and it's hell, so.
Yeah, and you have no air conditioning because all of your everything was built before you needed air conditioning. Because a nice, hot summer day in Portland used to be 76.
That is true. My girlfriend was very careful to make sure that we have an apartment with an actual fucking radiator. It is the only reason we have survived. It's the only reason we don't come home during the day to see our cat toasted like a roast chicken on the counter. Before we begin, I would be in violation of my strict, sacred oath if I didn't thank Cindy K for supporting us over on Patreon. Cindy, you are the repulsor projector that allows this show to make a soft landing. If you, listener, are interested in early access to the show, episode outtakes, the Daughters of Ferrix Discord server, and monthly bonus episodes, check us out at patreon.com/Daughters of Ferrix.
Do it, or the ISB officer from the joke will bring tea to you.
Supervisor Blood. That's not that's not what happened in the joke.
Oh, I know.
So, it has been a damn busy season for Daughters of Ferrix, both for us behind the microphone and for you listeners. We talked about women in power by way of Mon Mothma, ruralism through Star Wars itself. We discussed the persistence of authoritarianism as portrayed in The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. We tackled the classic original trilogy Vietnam comparison. And most of all, it was the summer of The Acolyte. We celebrated on live streams with Star Wars Explained and others. We chatted about the High Republic and Golden Ages, about the Jedi and why the Order fell. Sophie, what was your favorite thing we did this summer?
I mean, no offense to the lovely episodes that you wrote, but I really did enjoy the ruralism episode and sort of breaking down the weirdness of our perceptions towards rural life.
A real fan favorite. I've also personally been evolving the style of this show. If you're not aware, listener, Ellie, do all the editing, and I am not an experienced sound engineer. I work by trial and error, and it's a pretty intensive process. Last year, it was just me and Sophie sitting in my bedroom, but now we've turned into a damn production. You all have said very kind things about the new integration of found audio and media clips, and now background music into Daughters of Ferrix. I'm trying to make each episode an experience, an event, episodes that mean something to you. You know, to you in the audience listening there right now. And maybe we can make episodes you want to share with the people in your life who like overthinking media too.
The Eleanor Mueller experience.
Yeah, the Eleanor Mueller TM experience, I guess. I want to keep developing our style. I'm proud of what we've been doing lately, and I've got some more tricks up my sleeve that I can hopefully implement soon. But to realize that ambition takes time, which is why, moving forward, this show is gonna move from a fortnightly release every other week to every 3 weeks. Call us Palpatine's Exegol broadcast the way our release is fortnightly. That's a Fortnite joke on the Star Wars podcast.
Is there a word for every 3 weeks? Is that like a fortnight and a half or whatever?
Ooh, that's a great question, Sophie. So we have wandered into a personal hell of mine, which is, listen, I believe that language should generally be conceived of as defined by how it is used. However, sometimes it's hard not to feel like words themselves deteriorate. In many cases, it seems like the word semi-weekly exists to delineate every other week as opposed to bi-weekly, which I, as a teenager, understood as twice a week.
But bi-weekly can mean both twice a week and every 2 weeks, technically speaking.
And so, apparently, can semi-weekly. There's no distinction between which means what, and no sense between the two. It doesn't matter. And so, the word tri-weekly can arbitrarily mean thrice a week or every 3 weeks. So I can't say this show will release tri-weekly because that could mean fucking anything. I normally like to respect the way language is adapted and evolves and stuff, but I am genuinely repulsed. I'm so disturbed by this fact. Anyway.
I do not respect this. This is like evil.
That aside, you asked, Sophie. You asked. We're going to release it every 3 weeks. This might not be a permanent change. We'll see, there's some flexibility. But honestly...
The trouble being here that Ellie has to have this thing called an apartment. As generous as our patrons are, and to be clear, they are very generous, it's not quite enough for her to make ends meet.
No.
So she's getting a job, and so...
I do in fact already have a job. I've had a job all summer, and kind of for that reason, looking back at the last, I guess, 5 or so episodes, I can't really understand how we got each one out in 2 weeks in the first place. You know, it's reading, researching, writing whole scripts, recording together, audio processing, editing, music. I think I get really task focused and forget just how much stuff that all is until I look back and think, what the hell? But hopefully, with a little bit of extra time, we can give the show more polish. I can keep experimenting, keep from burning out, and maybe even make Daughters of Ferrix more accessible to users on other platforms as well. We'll see. Not a guarantee.
Patent pending, etc., etc., etc.
Anyway, that's the end of my excuses. Today, as a way to cap off a season of good Star Wars and even better discussion, I think it's time for more mail from the HoloNet. Emails from you.
We know that this is what you sickos want.
We know that what you want is for this show to be yours. It's disgusting. You can't stand anything being about anything but yourself. At myself in every other episode.
That's right. I mean, clearly everyone who listens to this show, especially me, is a massive narcissist.
Yeah, well, we gotta give someone else a turn sometimes. We're gonna talk about emails from you, dear listener, which you have graciously sent in to the show email. Sophie, what's the show email?
Daughters of Ferrix at gmail.com.
Nope, it's not that.
Oh, it's just Daughters Ferrix, that's right.
What's the show email, Sophie?
Daughtersferrix at gmail.com.
Every week, I am genuinely surprised and impressed by the breadth of your knowledge and the quality of your questions. I love that we get to spotlight them in episodes. For example, our first email is from Fia. Hello there, Sophia and Eleanor. I'm back in your inbox with another question for you. Been keeping up to date and still adore everything y'all put out. The Ruralism and America Empire episodes recently were especially great. Free Palestine. My question this time: what do you two think about the possibility of a species reference book in the future? I know y'all sing praises of Chris Kempshall, well deserved, and how he's contributed to in-canon Star Wars publishing. And I've been thinking about what an in-canon book on Star Wars species might look like. I'd certainly hope it wouldn't be a look at these animals sort of thing, seeing as that's extremely, in-canon, speciesist. That's very nice, Fia. But that's sort of the attitude I've seen historically used to discuss species diversity. I'm particularly interested in what you two think about an in-canon species reference book that considers the political vis-a-vis scientific aspects of the subject, i.e. species applying/struggling for state recognition, the state subsuming one similarly evolved yet separate species under another, etc. How does a species come to occupy a spot in a parliamentary Republican Senate? How does someone like Jar Jar suffer verbal aggression from humans and manage to find an avenue for political significance within the status quo? I'm sure he's not the only one. Why do Twi'leks and Togruta have similar evolutionary features, yet experience systemic sexual violence very differently? Thanks so much, daughters. You're the best Star Wars podcast out there, in my opinion. And as always, may the cunt be with you, Fia.
Good email. As far as like an in-universe species reference book could go, I feel like there's like a world in which it could very easily become like a weird, like, 1800s like phrenology book where it's like the racial characteristic of X group of people from X place is such that they are inferior to X group of people, but superior to X group of people. That would be like disturbingly easy to happen. It would be like, the Gungans, they aren't very smart. Haha, humans much smarter, am I right? So there would have to be a lot of intentionality in making sure that it does not become that it's just like, I don't know if like there is like a cultural reference book on planet Earth that is not somehow a little bit weird about at least one of the groups that it portrays. But we wanted to like do that and not be like, the Twi'leks are really good at pole dancing. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Fia, I will tell you, this is a good question. I have to break it to you that in 2019, there was a reference book released that is in universe, less in the vein of something like Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire and Skywalker Family at War, not quite as much like propaganda. It's more like the book, if any of you listeners are familiar, Secrets of the Sith or Secrets of the Jedi, where there's in-universe information about a topic. It's very kids reference booky, but there is also like an original source of some of this information and annotation from a more contemporary source. That book is Alien Archive, A Guide to the Species of the Galaxy. Cards on the Table. Alien Archive is a very lovely book. It has these beautiful full color illustrations. It's super fun. I have a copy and I like it a lot. However, it's not great in this regard. Essentially,
first of all, it calls them all aliens.
I'll give you a taste. On page 121, there are two quote-unquote aliens from frozen climates. The first one is a tauntaun, right? We're familiar from Hoth, bipedal, essentially what are treated as beasts of burden, within Star Wars terms, non-sentient. And then under the tauntaun is a picture of Grand Admiral Thrawn.
Grand Admiral?
The Emperor recently promoted me after my victory at Baton.
I mean, look, Are You Smarter Than a Tauntaun was a hit game show across the galaxy several years ago.
Grand Admiral Thrawn, a noted champion of that show. No, and the entry about the Chiss is not like ghoulish or anything. They talk about the Chiss aristocra. They talk about the actual civilization. Like, it's not like they're giving... It's not like they're talking about the Chiss like they are literal animals. However, there is as much writing here about the Chiss as there is about tauntauns, which is about a paragraph both. The introduction of the book closes, "With details of over 200 aliens from across galactic history, we are happy to restore this enigmatic journal for public viewing." It's describing itself as enigmatic.
Are humans included in this book?
No, much to my great displeasure, when I first got this book, humans are not in here. Humans should be in here.
And the thing is, like, this book wouldn't have been written in universe, right? In the way that it was. Like, you wouldn't have had tauntauns and Chiss chilling together on the same page because, you know, for academic work, right, you would have like sentient species of the galaxy and then like non-sentient species of the galaxy. And that would be like two whole different topics of study. But I think to an extent, because it's a book designed for an out-of-universe audience, right, there is going to be some like, look at all these crazy, you know, things we made in Star Wars.
Right, and that's what it is. That's what this book is. I will say apparently the original text that most of this book is like several hundred years old in canon, you know, whatever.
So this is like Star Wars phrenology then?
It is a little bit Star Wars phrenology. And supposedly written by an Ithorian, but that's hearsay or whatever. Anyway, in Star Wars, the divide is between sentient and non-sentient. I, as a person who, like, cares a certain amount about animal rights, I question that distinction, but within Star Wars, it is useful because it essentially distinguishes between, like, political actors and what we would conceive of as, quote-unquote, animals. You know, what I would call non-human animals in our real world. Yeah, it is extremely fucked up to put those two side by side. And again, the book does consider sentient species as like political actors. There's a whole page of writing about Gungans, their culture, their relationship to the galaxy, their weapons and technology. But they are in a section with essentially fauna of Naboo. You know, the bigger fish.
There's always a bigger fish.
Humans, the Nubians, are nowhere to be found in here. What the fuck? I absolutely think that there is room in Star Wars for more and much more careful writing on non-human sentience. However, you'd really have to thread that needle. Star Wars is already sometimes kind of dicey in the ways in which it conflates the in-universe marginalization of non-humans with out-of-universe marginalized human groups. However, there's a degree of like understanding about marginalized groups that we can get from fantasy, from sci-fi. There's a non-zero chance that there are going to be a handful of young people over the next decade that kind of like Star Wars, pluck a copy of Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire off the shelf, and their first introduction to ideas about like systemic prejudice
will be from Star Wars.
These are going to be white kids because they won't have experienced it themselves, but will be from Star Wars.
Yeah, because they're from like Seattle or something.
Yeah, exactly. And that does matter. That is valuable. Fantasy is valuable for that reason, but God, they would have to be careful. I think you are right, Fia, to kind of hone in on the opportunity of a politically focused book about sentient non-humans in Star Wars, because I think it would need to deliberately diverge from the human. I would love for Star Wars to talk about why the hell there is a divide between humans and extremely near humans, whatever the fuck Dryden Voss is, Umbarans, Pantorans. Like, why are these people who are not considered humans when they seem so biologically close by? What is the history? What is the weird, colonialist reason why the category human was created as distinct from these other things? You could have, some galaxy brain shit in that book. You could also have some real smooth brain takes in there. So I don't know if Star Wars is ready for a book like that, honestly. I worry that if publishing did something like that, weird portrayals of things on screen that are much less careful could be kind of forever tainted. If they came out with a book that took seriously the issue of droid liberation, what does that look like for us as Star Wars fans enjoying Star Wars in the future? There's a degree to which Star Wars is built upon some fucked up stuff. Can we make peace with that enough to keep going? And these are very large questions that I cannot answer for you. But yeah, if Star Wars were to do something like that, they would have to fucking thread some needles.
It would be a difficult undertaking, to be sure. Thank you for your question, Fia.
Okay, I gotta put my book back on the shelf. One sec.
I was looking at it on the internet. It looks nice.
It's a genuinely cool book. I really like it. I bought it for my ex-wife because she was interested in it because she liked the art. And then I ended up with it in the divorce. And I'm really glad that I did because it's a great book.
Yeah, I got my Star Wars art book in the divorce.
I got a few Star Wars art books in the divorce.
I'm sorry, but that is one of the funnier things you've ever said to me in our entire time of knowing each other.
I just, Star Wars is important to my life. Star Wars was important to my relationship and or ended my marriage. All right, next one. This email is from Gwen. It's kind of two topics, so we're going to talk about the first and then we're going to talk about the second. Dear Daughters of Ferrix, really love how the podcast looks at Star Wars through the lens of politics.
I have to object with that because we definitely look at politics through the lens of Star Wars more than we look at Star Wars through the lens of politics.
Sometimes we look at neither through the lens of neither. Sometimes we talk about Sonic.
Man, fuck the police.
Sometimes we talk about clothing.
Sometimes we talk about Phineas and Ferb.
We did talk about Phineas and Ferb.
All right. One episode I found very insightful was the one on urbanism and Coruscant, in which the question on how a population of trillions of beings could be maintained was brought up. In Legends, at least, there are food synthesizers, but it is unclear how they work and if they need raw material to synthesize food. Weirdly, there are still animal markets selling cattle on Coruscant, which seems redundant and cruel if you can synthesize meat. If they exist in canon too, then the planet's population could be supported without outside assistance apart from maybe raw material for energy production. This would still mean that the many people without access to electricity in periods like the Clone Wars were exposed to the threat of starvation.
I'm going to choose to believe that there are no food synthesizers on Coruscant, and this is because I think food synthesizers are dumb and boring. Sci-fi society is more interesting if it still has to deal with material scarcity, to some extent.
Food synthesizers do exist in both Legends and canon. It seems like they are a thing that is mostly on ships. They exist off of ships, but primarily you have them on spaceships, probably because they aren't great. Material scarcity still exists. They do not create food from nothing. You gotta plug stuff into them. This is not something that is super fleshed out.
Oh, so it's not like a Star Trek thing, which just little dots appear and you get 500 cigarettes or whatever?
No, you gotta stick in sugar and
glucose and fiber, and you just eat.
Yeah, but the thing about food synthesizers is that they are essentially passingly mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, almost all of the time that they are used. The Ebon Hawk has a food synthesizer in Knights of the Old Republic, but that's not it doesn't fucking matter.
What's the gunk that comes out of the synthesizer on this bucket anyway? Do you never clean the darn thing?
You are right to say that it would be cruel to continue meat farming on Coruscant, But also, we live in a world where there are lots of very good meat alternatives, and people still love to eat meat, even shitty meat that is worse than meat alternatives. God, is it my animal rights episode? God, fucking soapbox Ellie over here.
Ellie is entering her, like, extra vegetarian era at the moment.
Anyway, so sometimes avoiding cruelty is not a good enough reason for people to stop doing things the way they have always done them.
Which sounds horrible, but I'm not a vegetarian, so...
It is horrible. Next part. On another note, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on insect species in Star Wars and communism. Star Wars seems to dehumanize insect species more than other kinds of aliens, such as with the Geonosians. In Legends, however, there is the quite interesting case of the Killik, a species of hive-minded aliens which can introduce humans into their hive mind. Multiple Jedi are introduced to it and fight with them against the militaristic Chiss who are attacking them for living in their space. Becoming a part of this hive mind is portrayed as a bad thing, even in cases of deliberate joining, and despite the fact that people in the hive mind still have control of their actions. Hive minds are often linked with Western perceptions of communism, and by extension, authoritarianism. Maybe this causes a lack of examination of the concept. What are your thoughts on hive minds? Do you think ethical hive minds could exist? And what would they look like? Also, what kind of insect representation, if any, would you be interested in for Star Wars? All the best, Gwen.
I think the reason that bug aliens, insect aliens, right, are not well loved in Star Wars is because occasionally Star Wars really likes to have like a scary, from a human point of view, a scary alien. And most humans don't like bugs. If you ever woke up to a cockroach crawling on your bed, you understand the feeling, right? Because it's like the type of life that exists on this planet that is sort of the most foreign to the way we're used to living, right? Like it's literally reversed.
It's just the most consistently unpleasant for a lot of people.
Right. Like crabs, evil. Lobsters, evil. Spiders.
Which is not true. They're just guys. They're just dudes.
Right. But you feel like they're evil because, again, they're like a mode of life that is wholly different. It's like having like an actual alien on our own planet. And so when we think of something that is like truly foreign, truly alien, truly a little bit scary, a really easy analogy to make is bugs. Now, insect aliens in Star Wars are interesting, right? Because our most prominent example is, as you mentioned, the Geonosians. And the Geonosians are a hive mind, except when they're not, kind of, right? Like, that's the vibe you get from them. Like, we have, like, what's the one guy who's talking to the Separatists who gives Dooku the Death Star?
Poggle the Lesser?
He gives Dooku the Death Star, right?
Poggle the Lesser.
Yeah, Poggle the Lesser, right? Like, he is not a hive mind. But all the other Geonosians who, like, sort of mindlessly attack the Jedi and stuff, they are a hive mind. So...
Well, the Geonosians have a queen. There is some nominal hierarchy there.
Yeah, they're clearly just ripping off Orson Scott Card is what they're doing.
Well... he doesn't deserve to not be ripped off. So besides, his stuff is good. Rip him off. I don't care.
Now, as for like a consensual hive mind, if we're speaking in like purely like theoretical terms or philosophical terms, I guess you could have a consensual hive mind.
Absolutely.
The main problem being is that you can't have a hive mind. That's not a thing that we can do at the present moment. We can't like share consciousness with one another, if you take my meaning.
And we're potentially better off for it.
Look, I don't want to share Donald Trump's consciousness. I don't know about you. Or like...
Why'd you go from 0 to 60? I don't want to share your consciousness, Sophie.
That's true. I don't want to share your consciousness either. Like...
We regularly collaborate on things.
I like Ellie, but I don't really want her in my head.
But also, I personally, unavoidably, subscribe to certain American ideas of individualism. So I am definitely less inclined to like that sort of concept than someone who has drunk less of the Kool-Aid. Now, I'm not a ghoul. I think there is a lot to be said about collective action, etc., but I'm a pretty independent person. At least I like to think that I am. I'm not super...
I am a ghoul.
Right, we know this. But I don't know. I have certain learned cultural things. I've got baggage, and that baggage that baggage is carried by Star Wars, right? Obviously, we have ideas in America about how collectivism operates, how it's, uniquely evil and blah, 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 blah. Star Wars isn't always awesome. American culture has liked to portray its enemies as essentially brainless masses working together against the good of the US of A.
Freedom versus communism.
And linking that to insects is not much of a reach, right? The enemy is mindless, the enemy is vermin, the enemy is bugs, etc., 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 etc. Often there's a racial element. Potentially always there's a racial element. Unless it's the Germans. And
no, if it's the Germans, there is a racial element too. It's just in the opposite direction it usually is.
We're the bugs.
And they're trying to crush us, but we can't let that happen.
So Star Wars uses symbolism. Star Wars uses familiar portrayals of groups of people. Sometimes that's a little icky. Sometimes it's just kind of contradictory because Star Wars wants to have its cake and eat it too. Just like with Fia's question, on one hand, Star Wars wants to have a wacky galaxy where you look at a guy and go, whoa, that's crazy. But Star Wars also wants you to take that guy seriously 3 years later when one of his species shows up in The Bad Batch as the mother of a whatever, blah, blah, blah. This is not a bad thing that Star Wars does. I think it's a good attempt, but it is always going to be complicated as viewers and as people who really want to take Star Wars at face value. It's not a bad thing, but it is a fact about Star Wars that Star Wars wants to, I guess, eat its cake and have it too. Unabomber moment. Next one?
Email.
Next, we've got a follow-up from Kayan. Kayan has got what they refer to as some more dumb questions. First one, real-time hologram communication. How? Is the answer that we should just Jedi mind trick ourselves and forget about light speed and that there would be stupid long delays? Or have they made an in-universe explanation with quantum entanglement or something for how communications travel faster than light? For that matter, I'm always interested in what the media landscape is like. Being made before the internet, they're stuck in this weird low data universe. That Han could not know about Jedi so soon after they died, it would be like me not knowing anything about the Beatles or MLK.
Galaxy much bigger than regular world. There's a lot more going on and a lot more information to sift. There is the HoloNet, right? Which is kind of like the internet?
There is the HoloNet. The HoloNet is occasionally functionally identical to some forms of the internet, usually pretty primitive forms of the internet. Information distribution in Star Wars is just a little bit weird, but at the same time, information about the Jedi was the target of intense propaganda campaigns on the part of the Imperial Machine, which is a massive state, right? It's not ridiculous that people couldn't really know or care about the Jedi. There were only 10,000 of them at their height around the prequels. It's a big galaxy. Most people are not going to see a Jedi. Lots of people are not even going to hear stories about a Jedi from anyone credible. They are so far removed from galactic life for a lot of people that it's not insane that they could be erased. Yeah, it is. The Empire did move pretty fast. That is a conceit of the story, but it's not ridiculous. The media landscape, I would say, is often analogous to our real world one, but one, we see a lot less of the media because Star Wars is more concerned with practical matters than media, because the people who watch Star Wars are already little media goobers. We want to pretend like we're watching real stuff. And people are on their phones less.
Star Wars is much less online than the real world. Everyone in Star Wars touches grass.
Yes, they touch grass, they touch dirt, they go outside, etc. Real-time hologram communication. The answer is it just happens. There's no explanation that I know of. If there is an explanation, the explanation is bullshit.
I think quantum entanglement is the best theory. That's the thing that everyone uses in sci-fi these days because it's technically possible.
Star Wars is not interested in the technically possible. Star Wars needs to do phone calls sometimes, and so they do phone calls. And those phone calls are three-dimensional and blue because it's the vibe.
And they're very high bandwidth.
Even if there is an explanation, I think that explanation is kind of inherently deeply bullshit. bullshit, and I think that's totally fine. You know, it is not that type of sci-fi, for better or for worse. You know, if you like that type of sci-fi, more power to you. You're just not usually going to get it in Star Wars. And there are ways in which, you know, hologram communications are strengthened and quickened, and you move further back in canon and it gets harder and harder and harder. But, you know, nah. There's only so much we can say. Kane continues, also, I disagree with your take in Jedi as a religion. The point I think you missed from the question was that Force atheism makes no sense in the Star Wars universe. I agree that the religion is how you explain the unknown workings of the Force, but I, as an atheist who doesn't believe in anything supernatural because I have no evidence for it, would immediately believe in the Force and need to find an explanation for it. So the spiritual ecosystem is very different to today. It's like not believing in magic if you're a hobbit. You could, but the text in the audience would think you're a fool.
Force atheism makes no sense to people who believe in the Force, like you, me, and a lot of people in Star Wars, because we've all seen proof, right? Like, we've seen these whole, like, series of movies and books and shows about people using the Force.
And like, connecting to the Force in weird, trippy, fucked up ways.
Right. So it doesn't make any sense to us. I think in the same way it doesn't make sense to, like, Catholics, that people aren't Catholic because, you know, they have all these, like, Eucharistic miracles and things going on. Or, like, Pentecostals don't understand why people aren't Pentecostals because they're all like speaking in tongues and rolling on the floor and stuff. Like, it doesn't make any sense to us because we are, you know, inherently on the inside of the whole thing. But if you aren't on the inside of the whole thing, if you haven't seen all these movies about the Force, if you never met a Jedi, it's like pretty easy to believe that, like, oh, this is just a whole bunch of hokey crap thrown together to be the opiate of the masses on whatever planet we happen to live on.
Well, and they're the empirically provable parts of the Force, you know. Again, Darth Vader can move stuff with his mind.
Or is that just what they want you to believe?
But I, as Han Solo, cannot verify that the relationship that Luke believes that he has to the Force is genuine. That is the Force and not just a fact about the world that some people can do telekinesis. And we can absolutely say, well, our Han Solos of the setting are wrong, and in some ways they are, but A, they're, you know, making pretty reasonable assumptions about the world that they've experienced, and B, I don't know, sometimes people are wrong about their beliefs. Like, that's not that weird. There are characters that believe that authoritarianism is like a solvent way to run a galaxy, and they are wrong, and we have opinions about them. And like, I am a person who in the real world has certain ideas about who in their religious beliefs are wrong. And I mostly keep quiet about that, and I'm nice about it because it's annoying to go around and be like, well, actually, blah, 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 blah. That's not necessary. We don't need that energy. And so, yeah, sometimes people are wrong. There are bound to be atheists in Star Wars who can look at Force manipulation and say, well, we don't know that something else isn't going on. And I think that's a really reasonable assumption to make. I feel like the more I have this conversation, and you know, this is my own take, you are welcome to disagree, but I think the more I have this conversation, the more of a Force atheist I become myself, where I'm starting to think, can we fully prove that the way we understand the Force is like complete? And I don't think it is. If the Force as an entity or as a real phenomena, quote unquote, exists, how much of the Force that can be spoken is the real Force? Anyway, we gotta move on from this one to an email from June. Hey daughters, recent episodes have me thinking quite a bit about my relationship with American hegemony. So as we all know, America is the current global hegemon when it comes to its economy, military, and most importantly for this, culture. For a little background, like many others, I grew up consuming copious amounts of American culture through movies, TV, music, games, what have you. It was almost all-encompassing growing up, and in Portugal in the early 2000s through to the early 2010s, there was a lot of media that wasn't translated much at all, especially in the realm of video games. So as the little ADHD nerd that I was, I hyperfixated on learning English the best I could as an 11 to 12-year-old, so I could actually engage with all the things I like and navigate online. Now many years have passed. English is second nature to me, but I enjoy engaging and learning about perspectives from cultures all over the world. As discussed, Star Wars is a profoundly American story. It's baked into its DNA, but I believe it can be an extremely flexible setting to tell any kind of story in. So I'd love to hear what kind of stories written by people from all around the world you would be most curious to see get made. Another pretty unrelated question I had was about what media/settings other than Star Wars that are very political, whether overtly or implicitly, do you enjoy? I'm personally a huge fan of A Song of Ice and Fire and the stories in it, and I'm in awe of how good House of the Dragon has been after they completely botched the ending of Game of Thrones. But I digress. Thanks for the awesome answers every time. Much love.
I love Sherlock Holmes. I have read like every Sherlock Holmes ever. So I think it would be quite fun to see Sherlock Holmes in Star Wars. And, you know, for all the similarities, British and American like culture and way of approaching media is like very different. I think it would be kind of interesting to see that. Also like Maori.
So you're thinking like the cultural influence of British stories in Star Wars. Star Wars is not English enough.
That's correct. I want some like Monty Python Star Wars. You also cut off what I was about to say, which is that I think it would be very interesting to see a lot of the kind of Pacific cultures, I guess you would call them, the Polynesians, right, have a very interesting sort of history that is in some ways analogous to Star Wars. I think a story or a series of stories about kind of people first, you know, sort of setting off into the unknown of space with like, you know, relatively compared to what they have in the future, like primitive, right? Like the Polynesian people were great seafarers, but they didn't have like, you know, container ships. They were doing like catamarans with sails and stuff, and they still like managed to colonize basically the entire Pacific Ocean. So I think it would be quite compelling if like we had a story about the first human settlement of the stars. Would it have been led by a culture like that? I don't know. That might be interesting.
The Americanness of Star Wars is weird and complicated because on one hand, original Star Wars, you know, be it the original trilogy or the publishing that came after or the prequels and, you know, even some of the really tentpole stuff in the last decade is prototypical for what Star Wars is. And because of this, Star Wars is deeply George Lucas, it's deeply American. But people from all around the world have loved Star Wars and made Star Wars and kept the flame of whatever the hell Star Wars is alive. Nothing exemplifies this more than Star Wars Visions. If you're not aware, listener, Star Wars Visions is... it's not a television show. It is essentially a series of short animated films. There was a first volume released in 2021 and a second volume released last year in 2023. The first volume was entirely anime studios. We got shorts from Science Saru, Kamikaze Doga, and 6 others, but very Japanese-influenced Star Wars, which was, you know, very, very cool. Star Wars has drawn, sometimes in problematic ways, on Asian and specifically Japanese imagery and culture a lot. And to kind of see that go back was really important and I think really beautiful. And then Volume 2 went fucking worldwide. It did what I wanted to do and took it to another level. They had stuff from like Punk Robot Studios from Chile, Triggerfish Animation from South Africa. They went for my beloved Studio Mir from South Korea. And we got to see really what Star Wars can be if you let it thrive beyond that prototype. And I think that's why Visions struck such a chord for so many fans that watched it. I've got a good friend who her favorite Star Wars is Star Wars Visions because of what it brings to the table and because of what it does with animation and with audio design. And I like Star Wars being monolithic. I like having a canon, but letting other people play in it improves it. And I hope that that kind of influence can start to seep into the canon, into what Star Wars is, not just existing on the periphery, because people from other cultures have been enjoying and drawing on Star Wars, and I think those people, just as much as Americans, deserve to be the ones making it. I would love to see some Star Wars that is deeply, deeply Chinese. Star Wars is really weird in China. It's never really broken through in the same way it has in a lot of territories, the same way it has in Japan. And what Chinese influenced Star Wars that exists, there's very little of it. There's like a web novel that's technically part of the High Republic that started a few years ago, is really distinct and brings something to the table that Star Wars just does not have. There is so much rich Chinese history that American audiences are just so clueless about, and to have Star Wars that is influenced by that would be fucking bonkers. So that's, I think, my pick. Sophie, what media do you like that has, some real political undertones or overtones? And why is it Dune?
I do like Dune. I was going to say Lord of the Rings, but the political undertones of that are not necessarily good, so...
I would say they're pretty solid. I think they're better than most people think they are. They're complicated. Lord of the Rings is complicated. Tolkien was a complicated guy.
Fun fact, Ellie and I discovered each other's existence in a Twitter conversation about Lord of the Rings. This is true.
I forgot that that's kind of how that happened. Huh, neat. Go figure. I have made no secret about how deeply I love Avatar: The Last Airbender. The only reason I make this show and not an Avatar show is because there's so much less Avatar. I think Avatar and Korra have a lot of very interesting, often very good and well-considered politics. They are super meaningful to me. And yeah, I would love an excuse to get to talk more about that someday. But yeah, very, very special place in my heart for both of those shows and their related comics, novels, and TTRPG. Our next email is from Jacob Toller. Hello, Daughters of Ferrix. I'm a newcomer to your channel, and while I do not always agree with your point of view, I still find it to be interesting and thought-provoking. If it makes you feel better, Jacob, I don't always agree with our point of view after the fact, so.
Yeah, neither do I, so...
One thing I've thought about while listening to your podcast was the lack of a left in Star Wars. You touched on this a little bit in your Andor video, but the vast majority of societies seem to be monarchies, democracies, military dictatorships, or oligarchies. Yet there seems to be a near-total lack of communist, socialist, syndicalist, or other similar left governments. My question for you is twofold. Should Star Wars attempt to include these types of systems in their galaxy? If yes, how would you integrate them into the Star Wars universe?
No, Star Wars could not include them in its galaxy for political reasons.
Yeah.
Because they would lose a substantial portion of their viewing audience, if not all of it, really, except for the people who listen to this podcast. Love you guys.
I don't think Star Wars should, because I think it might do it badly, and that would be embarrassing.
Well, because what they're going to do is, like...
The Geonosians.
They're not going to do Cuba, which is, like, as far as socialist states go, fine. They're going to do, like, North Korea or something. They're going to make, like, the worst possible... They're not going to do it well. You won't like it if Star Wars does a leftist society. And if they do, it's going to be like a rogue state, and it's going to be about how they freed all the people in that state from communism or whatever.
Right. I think the actual reason we don't see this, well, one is because our examples in the real world are not great, and the American political imagination is, shall we say, limited. But I think a big part of the reason is that we see a lot of centralized power in Star Wars and not super leftist. Is the mega egalitarian society going to be a part of the galactic government? I don't know. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Unavoidably, that shit exists, but it's probably rare and not going to be in the galactic limelight, for better or for worse.
How would I do it? I don't know. You could do something like early Soviet Union, right? When everyone thought it wouldn't be a bad deal. Lenin was much more normal than Stalin, as we all know. Less of a kind of weirdo. You could do like the initial overthrowing of the prior government, let's say. You know, it could be a monarchy, it could be like America if you want. Like, you can do whatever you want with that. But you could show sort of that, show the sort of badness of the previous system and the efforts to sort of get rid of it and replace it with something better, and like show the kind of struggle of fundamentally rebuilding society, right? Because the whole thing about post-revolution leftism is that it doesn't actually get easier, it gets harder. Fighting a war is easy. Reorganizing society off of principles that are antithetical to how the world has been organized before is much harder. Depicting that sort of struggle would be like an interesting experiment for Star Wars to undertake.
We'll have a really, really interesting call to arms, a solid argument for an egalitarian society published by the Walt Disney Corporation.
I don't believe it's a political party. I believe it's an un-American thing. And I feel that they really ought to be smoked out and shown up for what they are, so that all the good free causes in this country, all the liberalisms that really are American, can go out without this taint of communism.
Famously known for not controlling its own municipality in Florida because it's that ANCAP.
Well, our next email is from Maxine. Dear Daughters, just wanted to open by saying thank you for all your hard work on making such an interesting podcast. I binge listened to all your episodes shortly after getting laid off, and it certainly helped me cope with such a shitty time. Again, thank you. Thank you, Maxine. I'm grateful that we could be entertaining during that time. Remember, you are the one that got you through that, but I'm really grateful that we could make it a little easier.
No, it was all us. It was all us.
Fuck off, Sophie. Your recent episode on the rural nature of Star Wars really struck a chord with me, and I had some thoughts I hope you'll find interesting and maybe contribute to your conversation. Firstly, Sophie's postulation on the near universal identification with Jacksonian rural idealism in America was interesting, and I feel that it's certainly true, but is dying.
So, I originally meant to say Jeffersonian when I wrote the episode, but I ended up writing down Jacksonian like 40 times anyways, which is fine because it is kind of the same thing, if a little bit different.
Speaking from experience, I went from having some sort of respect for rural life out of a sheer hatred for urban sprawl in the suburbs to hating rural America with a burning passion. I grew up in suburban Cook County, Illinois, where Chicago is, and the closest farms are hours away. There's no county fair, no 4-H, it's all very removed. So when I moved to rural Ohio for a job, I actually experienced real culture shock and frustration with society there over time. It started with some sympathy to a level of loathing I don't need to expand upon. Living a double life as a de facto gay man and closeted trans woman didn't help. I've actually found this more and more common with others who've moved to rural areas for school. 'Tis the Midwest after all. They've all found themselves rushing back to suburbia or the city, having strong negative feelings toward rural life and culture, especially with the political rural/urban divide. I think this sentiment is dying in the country, hopefully separating us further from those tea-drinking bastards on Airstrip 1. Have either of you noticed that rural idealism is dying a slow death as well?
I will point out two things to you that may change your sort of opinion on rural idealism dying. I'm going to presume that a lot of these friends of yours are themselves queer, as I believe you stated you are. I will say that that factor, especially in the present political climate, is probably going to do a lot to make you dislike rural life in general, sort of regardless of, your status of out, not out, etc. Secondly, I would suggest that a lot of the problem with people moving to rural areas and then not liking it is because, one, they don't have people who are rural, if that makes sense, right? Like, the reason it's easy for me to sort of blend in rural communities, even as my, sort of extremely homosexual self, is because I have people, I know people, I get the cues, I understand the social cues. So it's much harder if you are not exposed to that from childhood, to get the cues, to fit in, to sort of understand your place within the group. I don't want to discount your experience here, obviously, because personally, I sometimes do not feel positively about rural people and rural places because, they don't care for me very much at the moment. But the experiences of queer people are not generally reflective of the experiences of society at large.
Yeah, that's why we're called that.
I would say that in at-large society, even among sort of liberal at-large society, the Jacksonian myth remains. You'll hear it even expressed as people in the suburbs always wanting to have their own house with a yard. That is kind of like a Jacksonian ruralism all of its own sort, because there's an obsession with pastoralism, there's an obsession with sort of having your own land to prove yourself as a, worthy member of society. And the extent that that actually applies to actual rurality could be debated, but I think that a certain category of young people moving to the country, not liking it, and then moving back to the city is not necessarily indicative of a broader cultural shift against rurality and ruralism.
regrettably.
Yeah, we're gonna switch to an urbanist society instead of a ruralist society.
Yeah, in America.
It's that like
Imagine.
the meme of like the city that's like perfect and shiny and stuff.
Yes, future city.
America, if it was an urbanist society instead of a ruralist society, and it's that picture.
And it's a picture of a city.
Well, of like a gleaming futuristic city.
Maxine's second point is actually a big part of the reason why I definitely wanted to read this email. They say, as someone with over a decade's experience on the far left, I wanted to call bullshit on the idea that anarchists don't fall under the rural-urban divide. From the nasty rat-attracting guerrilla farms to the obsession with starting farm communes, anarchism is the most agrarian ideology on the left, bar none. Weirdly enough, I ran into some crusties while I was covering a local county fair during my time in rural Ohio. The exception may be syndicalists, but let's be honest, most of them exist in Spain. This is really funny. Maxine is correct.
No, I think that Maxine is incorrect in that there is at least one far left political ideology that is more ruralist, either Maoism or whatever the hell Pol Pot was doing.
Well,
because they were both very interested in moving people into the countryside, whether they wanted it or not.
Maxine, you've got my ass here. I think the big thing for me is that one of Sophie's arguments was that part of like right-left divide in certainly American politics and potentially worldwide is like where your ruralist resentment lies. Like, do you resent the urban people at home, or do you resent, an imagined urban people across the pond or elsewhere? This is not a phenomenon exclusive to America. We got a lot of really good comments about that. I think potentially I went, okay, well, I don't really think the issue is that anarchists resent. No, anarchists just kind of bring it back home. I think a lot of us resent urban living as it exists in the United States.
Because urban living, right, if we think about it everywhere at this point, has been structured, when it's properly set up under the current system, it has been structured to provide basically three things. Number one, economic and transport efficiency. And that extends to a whole bunch of different things. It's cheaper for, companies and also society at large to transport goods between large hubs of people living closer together. It cuts down on costs. If everyone was sort of evenly spread about across the entire United States at whatever the sort of idealized population density is, transportation would be much more expensive, goods would be much more expensive. So it is economically beneficial under a capitalist model to have people agglomerated into cities. Secondly, another reason it's, economically efficient to have people agglomerated into cities is job markets, right? To sustain again, capitalistic economy, you need a certain degree of, number one, available labor force, and number two, what you might call labor source liquidity. Liquidity being in the same sense that you talk about money. If you have, sort of a very small area, it's very difficult to have high labor liquidity. It's very difficult to start new businesses, start new enterprises, to do stuff in general. So if you have, a large number of people together, you're going to, by the nature of that, have an easier time getting people to do jobs for you, getting people to do work for your company or your whatever. Finally, cities are, primarily speaking, under a capitalist system, consumption markets, right? The whole point of having everything be so cheap, having everything be so efficient, is so that you can produce goods at the lowest cost possible, so you can sell as many of them to the consumer as possible. Another great way of, selling to more people is to have more people in an area.
Whoa, go figure.
I know, shocking, right? Like, that's why there's no Costco in, I don't know, name a small town, Ellie.
I don't know small towns. I'm from the suburbs.
There's no Costco in Arco, Idaho, which is coincidentally the first city to be lit by atomic power. There's no Costco in Arco. There's no IKEA in Arco. Agglomerating all of these people together makes higher orders of consumption possible than is available in a smaller town or smaller urban area.
And you might not even be able to ship IKEA to Arco because IKEA's shipping policy fucking sucks.
Probably. I don't even know if you can order Amazon in Arco. The end result of all of these different efficiencies being realized, economic efficiencies being realized from having a whole bunch of people living close together, is that capitalist economics tends towards urban agglomeration. It's why urbanization has been such a giant trend since the beginning of, effectively, the Industrial Revolution, because you need lots of people to make the economy work in a modern sense. And the more of them you have, to an extent, the more efficient you are. America has kind of tampered with some of the efficiencies of the city by creating the least efficient possible suburbia, but those efficiencies are so great that even in a less efficient version, it's still like a really good thing to do.
We still do it.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's like the entire way we all live, because all of us at this point live in the suburbs or in the city. 3/4 of Americans will live in the suburbs of the city by like 2050 or something. It's already some crazy number, like 3/4 or something in Europe, right? The reason we all live the way we do is because of capitalism. Whether you think that is a good thing or a bad thing is kind of up to you. So to have anarchism be kind of an inherently, ruralist or pastoralist or anti-urban political ideology makes a lot of sense because it is sort of fundamentally opposed to the present ordering of society.
Cool. Yeah, word. Now, I mean, it is correct to say that not literally every anarchist is anti-urbanist, but it is certainly a trend.
It's a higher percentage than other ideologies left of center, let's say.
Certainly. Maxine says, thank you for taking the time to read this rambling mess of a letter. Again, love the show and thank you for all the hard work and research and scripting the show requires. Best, Maxine Kwiatkowski. Maxine has also included at the bottom of their email a link to their YouTube channel, which they describe as a channel that covers the sectarian left and how they influence politics. I watched some of their most recent video. I thought it was really solid. It's called Bonapartista, Bonapartista. Again, thought it was really solid. For future reference, if Maxine's channel says some insane shit, sorry Maxine, retweets are not endorsements. But they linked it, so if you're interested, if that sounds cool to you, go ahead, check it out. Thank you very much for that email, Maxine. That was a fun one. Next up is an email from Eli. Hi, daughters. I just finished my first ever Star Wars book series, the first part of the High Republic. And as I learned more about the Jedi, I started to compare them to the Aes Sedai from the Wheel of Time. No idea if I said that right. The Aes Sedai are an order of wizards determined to save the world that can access an eternal, otherworldly power to do magic. This power is created by the ontologically good creator, but can be used freely for good and evil. To deal with rampant distrust of Aes Sedai, the Order, completely unwilling to submit to others' authority, create the 3 oaths. These amount to no lying, no creating weapons, and no killing humans except in self-defense, or in the defense of another Aes Sedai. These oaths are physically impossible for an Aes Sedai to break. My question is, if you had to, what unbreakable oaths would you give the Jedi? Hopefully you do a better job, as small spoiler, the Aes Sedai suck significantly more than the Jedi. All the best, Eli.
I'm going to bring up a thing that displays me as a real nerd of a 4th grader back in the day. But I loved the Aragon series. I loved it to death. I read I know. I read the whole thing probably 20 times.
I could never get past the first half. Funnily enough, I could also not get past the first half of the terrible Aragon DS game. It's really quite bad.
Oh, I didn't realize that there was a DS game.
Yeah, it's based on the movie, which I've heard is quite horrible as well.
Oh, the movie is horrendous. The movie is one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my life.
But I never got very far in those books. My brother loved them. They're very much fantasy books for that one dork who will eventually really like Dune and who played Age of Empires when they were slightly younger.
Oh, so true. I would have liked Age of Empires as a child. I didn't play it though. But one of the conceits of the magical language in Aragon, I think Paolini calls it the ancient language or something like that, which is not my favorite naming, but moving on from that, is that you can't tell a lie in it because it's the language of the universe. It's impossible to lie because you can only speak the truth with it or whatever. The elves in this series only really speak in the ancient language. So they never lie, but they found like really devious ways of only sort of telling the truth, if that makes sense. So having an oath to tell someone not to lie is only going to make them better at not telling the truth. They just aren't going to lie. They're going to, instead of just lying outright, deliberately obfuscate what they actually mean, or sort of trick themselves into thinking they're telling the truth. So that's a terrible oath, in my opinion. That doesn't really do anything. Also, I don't think that having violence only be available for self-defense is necessarily a good idea. I believe it was they can only kill in self-defense or in defense of another of their order. That doesn't really work for the Jedi because they have to kill in defense of like planets and stuff like that a lot. Or of like even non-sentient life. So that one's no good. And what was the third one? What was the other one?
As Eli lists them, the third one is no creating weapons. The Jedi would suck at that one.
The Jedi would fail that one so quickly because
weapons are part of their religion.
Right.
Everyone makes jokes about Mandalorians, but goddamn, Jedi.
Weapons are sacred to the Jedi.
Jedi always got to have the sword.
Yeah, they're knights after all. It's honestly really difficult to create a set of sort of unbreakable rules that will always govern something perfectly into not having a bad outcome.
Right, that's kind of not how things work.
No, because they have to be somehow self-reinforcing, and that's just really complicated. I mean, you could always sort of go like the Asimov on the podcast again. I know, shocking. I never talk about Asimov on the podcast, but there's the 3 rules of robotics, right? Number 1, a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. Number 2, a robot must obey orders given it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. Number 3, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law.
Bullshit.
It is bullshit, but it is kind of an interesting thought experiment in trying to create a set of rules that are completely fail-safe. I don't know if that's actually possible in the real world, and Asimov explores that later because robots break the 3 laws sometimes. Well, and the 3 laws also impose some restrictions on robots that end up causing problems, right? Like there's the one story in iRobot, the book, not the movie, where this thinking computer, this thinking brain, this giant robot that they have is trying to solve interstellar travel. As it turns out, you have to briefly die to travel at, faster than the speed of life. But you come back to life again afterwards. But the robot is almost destroyed by trying to make this work because it's not allowed to injure humans in any way, even though the injury is only temporary.
It's almost like you have to have some wiggle room to tell stories.
Right. I don't know. I think to some extent having like that sort of unbreakable rule or unbreakable code could actually end up being counterproductive to the Jedi as a whole. But if I was going to make them do one, it would be like, don't kill civilians or something. I mean,
Yeah, I think, God, okay. Eli says, if you had to, because I wouldn't. If I had an option,
no.
I think there's something really deeply inhuman about forcing people to do things. I think autonomy is a really important thing to have and really important in the types of stories that Star Wars has. I think hard and fast rules are not something that exist in Star Wars almost ever. That makes a lot of dorks' heads explode, but it's true. What rule would I give them? Never use the Force to levitate a pair. Okay, next one.
Basically a war crime.
If Master Obi-Wan caught me doing this, he'd be very grumpy.
But you gotta do it in order to impress that hot girl that you've been assigned to.
To seduce the Nabooian senator.
Attack of the Clones is wild. All right, next one. Our next email is from Bryce M. Bright Sons, Daughters of Ferrix. I hope both of you are doing well. As always, I'm loving your podcast, and especially enjoyed your recent episode about rural identity in Star Wars. So today I'm emailing because I wanted your thoughts on where politicians in Star Wars, such as Padme, Rush Clovis, Mon Mothma, Ransom Castrofo, Rio Chuchi, etc., lie on the left-right political spectrum based upon their policies or motions they favor or oppose. I realize it's a pretty broad topic, but it's been something I've been wondering about for a while. George Lucas and other Star Wars creators generally generally lean left, which is often represented to some capacity throughout the series. Padme seems to lean liberal, such as her push for more funding for civilian welfare and support for refugees during the Clone Wars, and Leia also seems to endorse liberal-adjacent policies in the Bloodline novel as a member of the Populists. Ransom Casterfo, also from Bloodline, appears more right-wing as he admires the Empire and its fascist qualities. But I'm still not quite sure, as I'm more familiar with the social aspects of politics and less the fiscal side, and would love to hear both of your thoughts. Obviously, the Empire was a right-wing fascist organization, but it's the politicians in the before and after times that interest me most, and how the aftermath of fascism and corruption affects policies. As always, I'm loving the podcast, and thank you so much for being a positive and inclusive space in the fandom. Bryce M. Bryce, you are asking us to engage in the dark arts of political compass thought.
Kind of. Bryce wants a political compass from us, and we shall indulge them, because here at the Daughters of Ferrix podcast, we are your sworn slaves.
We are swine.
We are... We are swine. We do whatever the listeners want.
We do whatever the masses call us to do. No, politics is really quite complicated. There are certain markers that delineate political leanings in our real world or in specific countries that, only kind of apply in Star Wars. For example, Leia is very much in favor of like a decentralized government in Bloodline. And that is nominally a thing
because she is Thomas Jefferson.
Right. That is nominally a thing that conservatives in America gun for.
Nominally. Actually, for a whole different reason.
Yeah. Claim to. So very, very complicated. Hell, maybe we should do a bonus episode where we just political compass meme a shit ton of Star Wars characters.
Where is Mon Mothma? Top left.
Well, actually, my genuine opinion on this is that Mon Mothma, as with most people, changes over time. Mon Mothma has less and less faith in the state as an institution and in the apparatus thereof. That is something that makes it really hard for me personally to place characters in this sort of way, because they change, and they change a lot. Sophie, just left, right, left, right, center, where would you put, God, I don't know, Padme?
Padme is like Nancy Pelosi. She's center left. Look, and here's the thing, right? To a lot of our viewers, you would not like the economic politics of most people in Star Wars. Star Wars is very firmly like a triumph of liberalism sort of franchise. And by liberalism, I mean economic liberalism. There is not really a sort of deep questioning at all by anyone of, I guess what you could call rightist economic policy of free market capitalism.
Right. I mean, we will actually really talk about this someday. Star Wars is anti-corporatist a lot of the time, but it is not generally anti-capitalist.
Right. Star Wars is anti-corporatist in the way that a guy like Teddy Roosevelt was anti-corporatist, in that it is very interested in sort of exposing and getting rid of the abuses of certain corporations. It does not, however, believe that the capitalist way of doing economics is inherently bad.
Mostly. It waffles. Again, we'll talk about this someday.
So, and sort of as a result of that, most of the characters are sort of firmly pro-markets, I guess you would call it.
But also as a result, I think that Star Wars Overton window is fucked. Like, I think it's horrendous.
Oh, because there's basically no Overton window as far as economic issues go.
There are no leftists. We already talked about this.
Yeah.
So in some ways, Padme's like a fucking radical.
Yes. I don't know what the social spectrum would look like. I imagine that there are politicians who are like very pro, and I'm rolling my eyes as I say this, very pro alien integration, and others who are evil, which I guess gives Star Wars like a kind of like first half of the 20th century American political spectrum style of Overton window, which is that acceptable political discourse is around primarily social and moral issues, while the rest is kind of consensus, you might say.
Right. That's the water in which Star Wars is spawned from. So, Mon Mothma, I think Mon Mothma, I have a hard time putting her, especially on like a two-side spectrum, but
Maybe we should like have a bonus episode where we take like the 8 values quiz for Mon Mothma.
on her behalf.
Yeah.
I couldn't.
Like we take what we know about her and we're like plug it in there as best we can.
I don't think we could effectively do that, but it'd be funny.
We guess the rest off of vibes.
Saw Gerrera is further right than he would like me to say that he is. I'm sorry.
No, Saw Gerrera is George Washington. Or not George Washington. Not John Brown. But like, what if John Brown was less leftist than he is, I guess? He is like deeply against the sort of social issues that the empire has and has absolutely no problem with capitalism. He is like willing to lay down his life for like alien integration, but Saw Gerrera is a resist lib. Willing to lay down his life for like social issues, absolutely ambivalent towards capitalism.
That's insane.
Am I wrong?
I think you are probably wrong for the fact that Saw Gerrera gives his life to absolutely murking fascists, which a lot of resist libs wouldn't. All right. Last one, Rio Chuchi thinks clones are people, which is like fucking radical in Star Wars. Rio Chuchi, as left as you get in the Senate that I can think of, because she thinks that a type of guy who is traditionally treated like fucking dirt is a genuine...
She is a Quaker Massachusetts senator from the year of our Lord, like 1820. Like the only abolitionist in Congress, basically.
Yes, that is Rio Chuchi. As we know, Star Wars has a real fucking, I want to say dehumanization problem, but you know, the word human in Star Wars, depersonalization problem. Rio has actually good fucking takes about that. And like makes it politically known. Thank you for your email, Bryce M. Political compasses are a little bit evil, but it's a good question.
And the political compass as it currently exists is kind of bullshit anyway, so...
It's so bullshit. We'll make a bonus episode. Now we have an email from Dylan. Hello, Eleanor and Sophia. Hope all is well with you. I have a question for you both. Was it smart for the Republic to buy more clones for the war when they did? That being the episodes we see where Padme is fighting the bill. Listener, this is Pursuit of Peace and Senate Murders, this kind of arc where Padme and her senatorial buds are fighting against a proposed bill from Kaminoan Senator Hallie Bertoni to spend a shit ton of money on clones.
As heavy losses add up, a group of senators led by Hallie Bertoni of Camino propose an escalation of troop production.
In Attack of the Clones, Lama Su tells Obi-Wan that the clones have an accelerated lifespan, allowing them to be trained and put into battle in half the time. So I take it that clones age twice as fast as the normal human being. If we assume that we send them into battle when they're developmentally 18, none of the ones we see look younger, that means they take 9 years to grow and then train. So any clone order is at best 9 years away. Is the Republic then smart to order more as soon as possible? Or would they have been smarter to move to a force they can get more of more quickly? Droids, volunteer, conscription, etc. It just never seemed very practical to me. Or perhaps I'm missing a bit of canon? Thoughts? May the Force be with you, Dylan.
So, from like purely a strategic point of view, I had always sort of assumed with those episodes that there were some other batches of clones already sort of ready to go that they were ordering, but I could be wrong. And I am a sort of big proponent of all volunteer military forces as like always being the best for a number of reasons. I mean, morale, cohesion, not pissing off people in your population for no good reason.
Morality, ethics.
Hiring slave soldiers, not great. Yeah, if I was the Republic, I would have just been like, Uncle Palpatine needs you. Come to your local recruiting station and sign up to fight the Clankers or whatever.
Uncle Palpatine. Yeah, I mean, the clones are horrendously morally, we could say dubious, but that would be wrong. Morally repugnant.
There's no dubious about it. It's just evil. Yeah.
Occasionally the Clone Wars agrees with this, and then other times it wants to hit clone action figure against battle droid action figure, and so we forget that they're people. The answer is that there are still clones being produced in Attack of the Clones. Lamasu, is it Lamasu or is it? Yeah, it's Lamasu. Anyway, says that there are 1 million more on the way, right? Clones are in production at the Kaminoan cloning facility.
Putting aside for a moment the fact that 1 million clones is like wholly inadequate to fight a war on this scale.
You know, Star Wars does not know how to do its own scale correctly.
No, Star Wars, we've discussed this before. Star Wars...
Never ask a woman her age, a man his salary, or Star Wars for a specific number. Ever.
Right, because like low end, to occupy a planet, you need like, I don't know, what do you think, 30 million soldiers?
No, no numbers. Not gonna go well.
Yeah.
In the cloning facility on Kamino, in Attack the Clones, in the Clone Wars, we see clones that are little kids. And these are not, kids that are, shall we say, Republic property. I mean, I don't
like the words Republic property when applied to beings.
I sure fucking don't either, but it's hard to get that idea across. That the Republic claims is their property, that they have paid for. I'm sure a big thing that military contractors do is make a bunch of fucking shit and then try to sell it. Other times you don't make stuff until you have the bills, but like, they're at war. Of course, Halle Bertoni is going to be like, fucking shit, we have 1 million more clones on the way. We gotta sell these. I need to put a bill into the Senate to sell these.
These living beings.
People, these human people. So yeah, clone production does not end in the decade before the Clone Wars, and they're almost certainly making new ones still after the Republic, until it kind of seems like, oh shit, the Empire doesn't want these. Oh shit, we're getting orbitally bombarded. But like, there are clone cadet refugees. There are kids, and there are teenagers, and were they purchased? I don't know. I think the answer is often no, even if the expectation is that they will become Republic property, because the Republic is so in bed with the Kaminoan cloners, and they were at a catastrophic level of war for 3 years, Good question. Fuck the Republic.
Yeah, the Republic really compromised itself beyond redemption by hiring a slave army, I've got to say.
Good job, George. Heroes on both sides.
Well, yes, because both sides technically used a slave army. Isn't that great?
Justice for R0GR. Thank you very much for your email, Dylan. If you, valued, cherished, beloved listener, have any questions, suggestions, or corrections, you can send them to our show email, daughtersferrix@gmail.com.
If you want to listen to new episodes as they release every 3 Wednesdays, you can find us on most places you can listen to podcasts. You can find sources for this episode on our website, daughtersofferrix.com, and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FerrixPod, FerrixPod.
Thank you to our comrades Joel Miranda and Emrys Nereus for making this episode possible. If you want to support the show, visit patreon.com/Daughters of Ferrix. I have been Eleanor Mueller. You can find me at The Letter Bomber on most platforms. Sophie, what about you?
You can find me at @TheRedLine_pod, where we talk about trains, at Episcopal, where we talk about religion, and at Sophia and SLC, where I don't really talk about anything.
This episode was edited by me, Eleanor Mueller. Our podcast art is by Jill Mueller. Our intro and outro music was arranged by me, with themes by Nicholas Bertel and John Williams. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and for sending emails.
We get a lot of good emails. We get a lot of good emails from around the world. Genuinely impressed.
Portugal.
Other country, Brazil?
We got one from Brazil. We've had some from Central Europe and a lot from the UK, unsurprisingly.
A lot from the UK. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Probably like a Canadian in there as well.
We've had a couple. Harrison's Canadian. He writes for this show.
Oh.
So
today I learned.
Yeah.
Yeah, big minority Canadians. The only minority that deserves to be oppressed. To be clear, I don't actually believe that about Canadians.
Will I leave that caveat in the final edit? Only time will tell.
What are you gonna do? Get me canceled?
No, this show isn't popular enough for that.
Not popular enough yet.